Harry Potter, Game of Thrones, DayZ, and Sword Art Online. These titles all have one thing in common. They were so influential that they changed a specific industry forever. It seems like we can add another title to this list after Arcane took the #1 spot of most watched shows on the world's biggest streaming platform, Netflix, in over 30 countries. It's also one of the best rated shows on Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb, so it's safe to say that Arcane will have a huge impact in the next few years. I'm Stefan, and this is how Arcane changes Western media. Animated shows and movies are in a tough spot in the West. While it's gotten better over the years, we are kinda in the spot video games were like 10 years ago. It's starting to get its recognition, but it's not taken really serious yet. And that's because animated shows have the stigma of being for children, low quality, or just for comedy. And in the case of animes, we have the problem that they are produced by Asian people for Asian people. That's why Western audiences sometimes have the problem of getting into these stories, even though some of them are really good. And a lot of them are also just copy and paste of the same story. Looking at you, Isekai, you will get your own video, don't worry. In the last years, we got some good animated shows and movies for the Western market, with Castlevania, the animated Spider-Man movie, or Avatar, The Last Airbender. But none of them were able to influence Western media as Arcane will be able to. Spider-Man is a comic book movie, and while it has good quality, it's still just a comic book movie. Avatar is targeted for children, even though you can definitely enjoy it as an adult. And Castlevania? Well, while it has its audience, it's just not as popular. On the other hand, Arcane has high quality animation, it's simply gorgeous. And when characters talk, they don't just have the mouth or maybe eyes moving on a static image of a face. No, in Arcane, you get great facial expressions. The face muscles and body moves while they talk, and the animation is smooth and shows of high quality in every scene. It's also not made for children, rated 16 and above in my country and tackling mature themes, combined with a story that has you sitting at the edge of your seat saying just one more episode at 3 AM in the morning. Arcane puts most other shows aimed for older audiences to shame, no matter if animated or in live action. And the characters, to be honest, they are just great. They have depth and feel like real people if you were to live in Runeterra. Every character has motives and struggles, making even one of the most hateable characters relatable by the show's ending. The series also shows the potential of animation. You can't portray Jinx's insanity like that in live action. Well, you could, but it wouldn't feel right. And I will tell you why in my next point. Because you will never be able to portray fantasy stories as well as in animation. Magic and fantasy environments will never achieve that level of immersion in live action. That's because, by making the story less real, the fantastical elements become more real. Sounds weird? Well, let me explain. Magic, the kind with circles and runes in the air, or the kind that makes you shoot lightning out of your fingertips, will never be fully realistic, because it isn't. And when you put real human actors next to them, you can tell the difference, especially if your budget is limited. Think of it this way, you're reading a comic and suddenly there's a character from a different artist with a different art style on the page. This would draw you out of the story immediately. Same thing with magic in live action. Now, in animation, you can create the magic and fantasy environment in the same style as the whole world and characters, thus reducing the difference between those elements and not drawing the viewers out of the story. In the end, animation is just a tool for storytellers that has advantages and disadvantages. And I really think that through the popularity of Arcane, Western producers will look at it in a new light. I think animation's biggest advantage is the ability to adapt unreal elements. Like in fantasy stories. Fantasy stories can be told with way more freedom since you aren't limited by the real world. I'm willing to bet that animation is cheaper to make than CGI. And as said before, the whole world of your story just seems more solid if everything is in the same style. But you aren't just limited to fantasy stories. Whereas live action movies are limited by cameras and the inability to look inside your character's head, in animation you could make the whole story point of view with the ability to hear your character's thoughts, or portray mental illness more visually and easier to understand like in Arcane. In short, animation has more freedom for creativity. But of course it's not just all sunshine, and there are some flaws in animation. Because you aren't limited by the real world, you also have to simulate the physics of our world if you plan to create a story with a realistic setting in animation. On the other hand, if you want real looking people, just stick with live action, because at the moment we are limited by technology, and trying to make inhuman objects more human leads to the uncanny valley effect. At last, because people hate anything that's different from the norm, it will still take time before there's a true acceptance for animated stories in the Western culture. Now, there's one market that would definitely profit the most from a change to animation. I am speaking of book adaptations, especially fantasy books. Long-running book series often have the characters age. This is not a problem for animations. You have a voice actor and you can change the animated character the way you like. It's also a blessing for every book with children as main characters, because movies or shows are often filmed over the span of multiple years and child actors are always hit or miss. Once again, you don't have the problem in animation. To be honest, while recording this I was just thinking about an animated adaptation of the Stormlight Archives. Just the whole setting storytelling and the magic system would be really difficult to portray in live action, but it wouldn't be a problem for animation. Epic fight scenes, giant swords and characters that can fly through the air, this screams for an animated adaptation. Another case would be the Percy Jackson books. Animation would be great for this. Percy starts around the age of 12 and you have a lot of fantastical elements with mythological sceneries like the underworld or monsters like the Minotaur. Every book could be adapted into like 6 hours of a show, and it's just a way better possibility to portray the story truthful to the books. For any companies watching, these books also have a huge following that will guarantee success unless you fuck shit up. Well, this was how Arcane changes Western media. In conclusion, I think its popularity makes a lot of companies see animation for the possibility that it is. These possibilities are especially great for fantasy adaptations, because animation allows more freedom, which fantasy stories definitely need. So, how do you think Arcane changes Western media? You can tell me in the comments.